The bullet tore through the saloon window at precisely the moment Sarah Thorne realized her uncle had gambled away her last hope of a respectable marriage, and she dove beneath the poker table with her heart pounding and her hands clutching the hem of her threadbare dress. It was late September 1878 in Jerome Junction, Arizona Territory, a dusty mining town carved into the side of Mingus Mountain, where copper veins ran deep and morality ran shallow. Sarah pressed her cheek against the sticky floorboards, breathing in the scent of spilled whiskey and tobacco spit, while men shouted and chairs scraped overhead. Another shot rang out, this one hitting the brass spittoon near the bar with a resonant clang that made her ears ring. "Get down, you fool!" someone hollered, and heavy boots thundered past her hiding spot. Sarah squeezed her eyes shut and thought about the conversation she had overheard just an hour earlier, before the violence erupted. Her Uncle Mortimer had been 3 whiskeys deep, bragging to a table full of miners about how he was going to marry her off to the highest bidder. "The girl's got nothing," one of the miners had said, his voice carrying across the dim saloon. "What family would want her?" "She's young and pretty enough," Mortimer had replied, his words slurring together. "That ought to count for something." "Pretty don't pay debts," another man had laughed. "She's got no dowry to her name, no land, no money, no prospects. You're trying to sell fool's gold, old man." The other men had joined in the mockery, their laughter sharp and cruel. Sarah had stood frozen behind the kitchen door, her face burning with shame. She was 19 years old, orphaned at 15 when fever took both her parents within a week of each other. Mortimer had taken her in, but only because he thought he could eventually profit from her. 4 years she had cooked and cleaned and mended for him, hoping he might show her some kindness, some familial affection. Instead, he saw her as livestock to be traded. The shooting stopped as suddenly as it had begun. Sarah heard the sheriff's voice, gruff and authoritative, ordering everyone to stand down. Slowly, cautiously, she crawled out from under the table. Her dark brown hair had come loose from its pins, falling in waves around her shoulders. Her green eyes scanned the room, taking in the shattered glass, the overturned chairs, the man lying near the doorway with blood seeping through his shirt. "Someone get the doctor," the sheriff yelled. Sarah moved automatically, her natural instinct to help overriding her fear. She grabbed clean towels from behind the bar and rushed to the wounded man's side, pressing the fabric against his shoulder where the bullet had struck. He groaned, his face pale and sweating. "You're going to be fine," she told him, though she had no idea if that was true. "Just hold still." The sheriff nodded at her approvingly. "Good girl, keep pressure on it." Mortimer appeared beside her, his breath reeking of alcohol. "Get up from there, Sarah, that's not proper." "He's bleeding," she said without looking at her uncle. "I don't care if he's dying. A lady doesn't touch strange men. Now get up before you ruin what little reputation you have left." The words stung, but she did not move. The wounded man's eyes focused on her face, grateful and afraid. She kept the pressure steady until the doctor arrived, an elderly man with trembling hands who shooed her away so he could work. Mortimer grabbed her arm and hauled her to her feet, his fingers digging into her flesh hard enough to bruise. "You embarrass me," he hissed. "Bad enough you're worthless. Don't make yourself look like a common tramp, too." He dragged her out of the saloon and into the dusty street. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, and the air smelled of sage and copper dust. Jerome Junction was built on a steep hillside, its buildings clinging precariously to the slope. The main street was really more of a terraced pathway, with wooden stairs and narrow alleys connecting the different levels of the town. "We're going to the boarding house," Mortimer announced. "There's a man I want you to meet." "I'm not meeting anyone," Sarah said, trying to pull her arm free. His grip tightened. You'll do as I say. I've found someone willing to take you despite your lack of prospects. You should be grateful. Who? Edgar Fleming. He's a businessman from Prescott, owns a freight company. He's 53 years old, twice widowed, and looking for a young wife to give him sons. Sarah's stomach turned. I won't marry him. You don't have a choice. I've already accepted his offer. What offer? I have no dowry. You said so yourself. Mortimer's lips curled into something that might have been a smile but looked more like a snarl. He's willing to overlook that in exchange for youth and obedience. He'll pay me $200 to take you off my hands. $200. That was what she was worth to her uncle. Less than a decent horse. They reached the boarding house, a ramshackle two-story structure that leaned slightly to the left. Inside, the air was stifling and smelled of boiled cabbage. Mortimer led her to a small parlor where a thin, severe-looking man sat in a worn armchair. His hair was slicked back with pomade, and his eyes were cold and calculating as they swept over Sarah's figure. "This is her?" Edgar Fleming asked. "This is Sarah," Mortimer confirmed. "Sarah, show some manners. Curtsy for Mr. Fleming." She stood motionless, her hands clenched at her sides. Fleming rose from his chair and circled her slowly, inspecting her like a farmer examining a cow at market. "She's thin. Is she healthy?" "Healthy as an ox," Mortimer lied. "Never sick a day in her life." That was not true. Sarah had suffered from pneumonia the previous winter and still sometimes woke gasping for breath in the night. And she can cook. Keep house. She's been keeping house for me for 4 years. Best cook in Jerome Junction. Also not true. Sarah could manage basic meals, but she was far from skilled. Fleming stopped in front of her, standing too close. She could smell the tobacco on his breath. "Look at me, girl." She met his eyes, refusing to show fear even though her heart hammered against her ribs. "You'll do," he said finally. "But I want to see her teeth. Open your mouth." Sarah's face burned with humiliation. "I am not a horse." Fleming's hand shot out and gripped her jaw, his fingers pressing painfully against her cheeks. "You'll do as you're told or the deal is off." Mortimer moved forward eagerly. "Sarah, cooperate. Don't be foolish." She wrenched her face away from Fleming's grasp and stumbled backward. "I will not marry you. I don't care what arrangement you've made with my uncle." "The arrangement is made," Fleming said coldly. "We'll be wed tomorrow morning." "Your uncle has already signed the papers." "He has no legal right to sign anything on my behalf. I'm of age." Fleming's expression darkened. "You'll find I'm not a patient man, Miss Thorne. Tomorrow morning at the justice's office, 10 o'clock sharp. If you're not there, I'll have the sheriff fetch you. One way or another, you'll become my wife." He swept past her and out the door, leaving Sarah alone with her uncle. Mortimer glared at her. "You've gone and done it now. If you ruin this deal, I'll throw you out with nothing. You'll end up in a brothel or dead in a ditch. I'd rather die in a ditch than marry that man. Don't be dramatic. Fleming is offering you a good life. A house in Prescott, servants, security. What more could you want? To be treated like a human being." Mortimer snorted. "Life doesn't work that way for girls with nothing. You should have been born rich if you wanted choices." He left her standing in the parlor, alone and shaking with anger and fear. Through the window, she could see the mountains rising in the distance, their peaks touched with the first hints of autumn gold. Somewhere out there, beyond Jerome Junction and its cruel inhabitants, there had to be a better life. But she had no money, no skills, and no idea how to survive on her own. That night, Sarah lay on her narrow cot in the tiny room behind the saloon's kitchen and stared at the ceiling. She could hear men laughing and gambling in the main room, their voices carrying through the thin walls. Tomorrow morning, Edgar Fleming would expect her at the justice's office. Tomorrow morning, her life would effectively end, unless she ran. The idea came to her slowly, taking shape in the darkness. She had nothing to pack, nothing to take except the clothes on her back and the small wooden box that had belonged to her mother. Inside the box was a silver locket, the last precious thing she owned. If she sold it, she might have enough money to buy passage on a stage to Prescott or Tucson or anywhere that was not here. She waited until the saloon grew quiet, until even the most dedicated gamblers had stumbled home or passed out at their tables. Then she dressed in her sturdiest skirt and blouse, pulled on her worn boots, and gathered her few possessions. The wooden box fit easily into the cloth bag she used for marketing. She crept through the kitchen and out the back door, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. The night air was cool and sharp, carrying the scent of pine from the mountains. Stars blazed overhead, so many and so bright that they cast faint shadows. Sarah hurried down the street, keeping to the darkest patches, avoiding the pools of light that spilled from windows. She had no clear plan beyond getting away from Jerome Junction before morning. She was halfway to the edge of town when a hand closed around her arm. Sarah gasped and tried to pull away, but the grip was firm and unyielding. She spun around, expecting to see her uncle or Edgar Fleming, and instead found herself looking up at a man she had never seen before. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and a chest like a barrel. His arms, visible beneath rolled-up sleeves, were thick with muscle earned through hard labor, not idle time. Dark hair fell past his shoulders, and a beard covered the lower half of his face. His eyes, even in the dim starlight, were startlingly blue and sharp with intelligence. "Running away in the middle of the night is a good way to get yourself killed," he said. His voice was deep and rough, like stones rolling down a mountainside. "Let me go," Sarah demanded, trying again to free her arm. He released her immediately, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. "Easy. I'm not trying to stop you, just pointing out that a young woman alone on these roads at night is asking for trouble. That's my business, not yours." "Fair enough." He studied her for a long moment. "You're the girl from the saloon, the one who helped that miner who got shot." She was surprised he had noticed. "Were you there?" "I was. Came down from my claim to get supplies. Ended up in the middle of someone else's fight." He gestured to a pack horse standing patiently nearby, loaded with sacks of flour and other provisions. "Name's Quentin Jameson. Most folks call me the Mountain Man on account of I live up in the hills most of the year." "Sarah Thorne," she said automatically, then immediately regretted giving her name. "Well, Miss Thorne, I'll bid you good night and safe travels." He started to turn away. "Wait," she heard herself say. "You said it's dangerous for a woman alone on the roads at night." "It is. But you're traveling alone too." "I am. But I'm 6'4", 240 pounds, and armed with a rifle, a pistol, and a knife. Most trouble takes one look at me and decides to find easier prey." Sarah looked at the dark road stretching beyond the town limits, disappearing into the wilderness. She thought about Edgar Fleming's cold eyes and her uncle's casual cruelty. She thought about the long, hard years ahead if she stayed, trapped in a loveless marriage, treated as property rather than a person. "Mr. Jameson," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "If you're heading away from Jerome Junction, might I travel with you for a few miles?" "Just until daylight. Then I'll continue on my own." Quentin studied her again, and she had the uncomfortable feeling he could see straight through to her bones, reading all her secrets and fears. "You're running from something or someone. That's my business." "It becomes my business if whoever you're running from comes after you while you're in my company." Sarah lifted her chin. "My uncle wants to sell me to a man I've never met. The wedding is supposed to happen tomorrow morning. If I'm still here, I'll have no choice. So yes, I'm running. And no, No one will come after me because I'm not worth the effort. The words hurt to say, but they were true. Mortimer would be angry about losing his $200, but he would not waste time or money chasing her across the territory. Quentin's expression softened slightly. I'm heading north toward the Rim country, planning to resupply at my cabin and then move on to Trap before winter sets in. It's rough country, and I'm not going anywhere near a town or settlement for at least 2 weeks. I don't need to go to a town. I just need to get away from here. What's your plan after that? Sarah had no answer. She had not thought beyond escape. Quentin sighed, a sound that seemed to come from deep in his chest. All right. You can travel with me as far as you want, but we need to get moving now before anyone notices you're gone. Can you ride? A little. Good enough. You'll ride the pack horse. She's gentle and sure-footed. He helped her mount, his hands strong but careful as he boosted her into the saddle. The horse shifted beneath her, and Sarah grabbed the saddle horn to keep her balance. Quentin untied the lead rope and handed it to her, then swung onto his own horse with an ease that spoke of years in the saddle. They rode out of Jerome Junction as quietly as possible, following a narrow trail that climbed up through scrub oak and manzanita. Sarah looked back once and saw the lights of the town growing smaller below them, like fallen stars scattered across the hillside. She thought she should feel afraid, setting off into the wilderness with a strange man, heading into country she did not know. Instead, she felt a wild, reckless relief. For the first time in 4 years, she was free. They rode through the night, Quentin setting a steady pace that ate up the miles without exhausting the horses. He did not speak much, but occasionally he would point out landmarks in the darkness. A distinctive rock formation, a particular tree, a place where a spring bubbled up from the ground. Sarah realized he was teaching her to navigate, showing her how to find her way in this wild country. As dawn broke, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, they stopped to rest the horses near a small creek. Quentin helped Sarah down from the saddle, and her legs nearly buckled beneath her. She had not realized how sore she was from hours of riding. "You did well," he said, handing her a canteen. "Most greenhorns would be whimpering by now." "I'm not a greenhorn," she protested, then reconsidered. "Well, maybe I am, but I'm tougher than I look." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, barely visible beneath his beard. "I believe that." He built a small fire and made coffee, strong and bitter and exactly what Sarah needed. He also pulled out some jerky and hardtack, plain food but filling. They ate in comfortable silence, watching the sun climb higher and listening to the morning songs of birds in the surrounding trees. "So what's your plan now?" Quentin asked eventually. Sarah wrapped her hands around her tin cup, letting the warmth seep into her fingers. "I honestly don't know. I have a locket I can sell. Maybe that will give me enough money to get somewhere bigger, somewhere I can find work." "What kind of work?" "I can cook and clean, mend clothes. Maybe I could find a position as a housekeeper or a companion to an elderly lady." Quentin poked at the fire with a stick. "Those positions usually require references, letters of recommendation from previous employers." Sarah's heart sank. She had not thought of that. "Then I'll figure something else out. I always do. I'm sure you will." He was quiet for a moment, then said, "My cabin is about 2 days' ride from here. It's basic but sturdy. I've got supplies to last through winter. You're welcome to stay there for a while if you need time to decide what you want to do." She looked at him sharply. "Why would you offer that? You don't know me." "True. But I know what it's like to need help and not have anywhere to turn. Someone gave me a chance once, years back when I was in a bad spot. Figured I'd pay it forward. What would you expect in return?" The question hung in the air between them. Quentin met her eyes steadily. "Nothing. I'd expect nothing in return. You could help with cooking and mending if you wanted to earn your keep, but that would be your choice. And before you ask, yes, there's a separate sleeping area. And no, I wouldn't lay a hand on you. I'm not that kind of man." Sarah wanted to believe him, but her experience with men had taught her to be cautious. Still, what choice did she have? She could take her chances alone in the wilderness, with no knowledge of the land and no survival skills, or she could accept help from this strange mountain man who had shown her nothing but courtesy so far. "All right," she said finally. "I'll come to your cabin, but only until I figure out my next step." Fair enough. They rested until midday, letting the horses graze and recover their strength. Then they mounted up and continued north, climbing higher into country that grew progressively more rugged and beautiful. Ponderosa pines replaced the scrub oak, their tall trunks rising like columns in a cathedral. The air grew cooler and smelled of resin and earth. Quentin pointed out edible plants as they rode, teaching her which berries were safe and which mushrooms to avoid. He showed her how to read animal tracks in the soft dirt, identifying deer and elk and the distinctive paw prints of a mountain lion. Sarah absorbed the information eagerly, realizing that this knowledge might mean the difference between survival and death. They made camp that night in a small meadow surrounded by aspens. Quentin demonstrated how to properly set up a camp, where to position the fire for maximum warmth and safety, how to string a rope for the horses so they could graze but not wander off. Sarah helped as best she could, following his instructions and trying to remember everything. After they had eaten, they sat by the fire as darkness settled over the mountains. The temperature dropped sharply, and Sarah huddled close to the flames, wishing she had brought a warmer coat. Quentin noticed her shivering, and without a word went to his pack and pulled out a heavy wool blanket. He draped it over her shoulders. "Can't have you freezing to death before we reach the cabin." "Thank you," she said, pulling the blanket tighter. It smelled like wood smoke and pine, a scent she was beginning to associate with safety. "Tell me about your parents," Quentin said, settling back against his saddle. "You said they died. What were they like?" Sarah was surprised by the question. No one had asked about her parents in years. "My father was a clerk in a mining office, very educated, always reading. He taught me to read and write, even though some people thought it was a waste for a girl. My mother was a seamstress. She could make the most beautiful things from scraps of fabric. She used to say that anyone could sew, but it took an artist to make something ordinary into something special. Sounds like they loved you." "They did." Sarah's throat tightened with grief that never quite went away. "When the fever came, they got sick within days of each other. My father died first. My mother held on for 3 more days, but I think she only did that because she was trying to arrange somewhere for me to go. She made me promise to go to Uncle Mortimer, made me swear I would let him take care of me. I think she died believing I would be safe with him." "I'm sorry." "Me too." Sarah wiped at her eyes. "What about your family?" Quentin was quiet for so long that she thought he might not answer. Then he said, "My folks had a farm in Missouri, small place but we got by. I had 2 older brothers and a younger sister. When the war came, my brothers joined up to fight for the Union. They never came home. My sister got sick a year later, same kind of fever that took your parents. After she died, my mother just gave up. She was gone within 6 months. My father sold the farm and drank himself to death. I was 18 years old, standing at his grave, and I realized I had nothing left to stay for. So you came west." "I did. Figured I'd try my hand at mining or trapping or whatever I could find. Spent years drifting from place to place, working odd jobs, learning the land. Eventually, I saved up enough to stake a claim and build a cabin. Been on my own ever since." "You get lonely?" He considered the question. "Sometimes. But I learned early on that being alone is better than being with people who make you miserable. Out here, it's just me and the mountains. No one to judge me, no one to tell me what I should be doing with my life. There's a peace in that. Sarah understood that more than he knew. The years with her uncle had been filled with constant criticism and casual cruelty. The silence of the mountains was infinitely preferable. They talked late into the night, their conversation wandering from topic to topic with an ease that surprised them both. Quentin told her stories about his years in the wilderness, about tracking a wounded elk through a blizzard and finding hot springs where steam rose like ghosts in the cold air. Sarah found herself laughing at his descriptions of the mischievous ravens that would steal anything shiny from his camp, and the time a curious bear cub had gotten into his food supplies. When they finally settled down to sleep, Sarah lay wrapped in the wool blanket, listening to the crackle of the dying fire and the sounds of the forest around them. Quentin had positioned himself between her and the open forest, a protective barrier without being obvious about it. She felt safer than she had in years. The next day they rose with the sun and continued their journey. The terrain grew steeper, and the trail narrowed until they were forced to ride single file. Quentin led the way, his horse picking its way carefully over rocky ground. Sarah followed, trusting the pack horse to know where to place her feet. Around midday, they stopped at a high overlook. Sarah gasped at the view spread out before them. Forested mountains rolled away in every direction, blue and hazy in the distance. A canyon cut through the landscape, its red rock walls glowing in the afternoon sun. "It's beautiful," she breathed. Quentin nodded. "This is why I stay. People think I'm crazy living out here alone. But how could I go back to towns and crowds and noise when I have this?" Sarah understood. In that moment, looking out at the vast wilderness, she felt something shift inside her. The fear and shame that had weighed her down for so long seemed to lift, blown away by the mountain wind. She was no one out here. She had no past, no obligations, no identity beyond simply being Sarah. It was terrifying and liberating in equal measure. They reached Quentin's cabin late in the afternoon of the second day. It was built in a small valley, sheltered by towering pines and situated near a clear stream. The cabin itself was larger than Sarah had expected, built from thick logs chinked with mud and moss. A stone chimney rose from one end, and a small porch stretched across the front. "Home, sweet home," Quentin said, dismounting. He helped Sarah down and began unloading the pack horse. Inside, the cabin was a single large room with a sleeping loft accessible by a ladder. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, and a sturdy table with 2 chairs stood in the center of the space. Shelves lined the walls, holding supplies and equipment. Everything was neat and orderly, surprisingly tidy for a bachelor living alone. "The loft is yours," Quentin said, setting down the supplies. "I'll sleep down here by the fire." "I can't take your bed," Sarah protested. "It's not a bed, just a pile of furs and blankets. I've got plenty. Besides, you'll be warmer up there with the heat rising." Sarah climbed the ladder and found he was right. The loft was small but cozy, with a thick padding of furs that would make a comfortable sleeping place. A small window looked out over the valley, and she could see the stream glinting in the late afternoon light. Over the following days, Sarah and Quentin fell into an easy routine. She took over the cooking, discovering that Quentin's supplies included flour, sugar, coffee, dried beans, and various preserved foods. She baked bread in the Dutch oven that hung over the fire, and made stews with dried venison and wild onions that Quentin gathered from the forest. He showed her how to identify different plants, which ones could be eaten and which had medicinal properties. In return, Quentin taught her survival skills. He showed her how to build a fire even when the wood was damp, how to read the weather by watching the behavior of animals and the shape of clouds. He taught her to shoot his rifle, patiently correcting her stance and helping her learn to absorb the recoil. The first time she hit the target he had set up, a chunk of wood balanced on a stump 50 yards away, she felt a surge of pride unlike anything she had experienced before. "Good shot," Quentin said, genuine approval in his voice. "You're a natural." Sarah lowered the rifle, grinning. "I never thought I could do something like this. You can do more than you think. You just never had the chance to find out." As the days turned into weeks, Sarah found herself changing. Her hands, once soft from indoor work, grew calloused and strong. Her skin turned golden from hours in the sun. She learned to move quietly through the forest, to notice the small signs that Quentin pointed out. A broken twig here, a tuft of fur caught on a branch there. The fear that had been her constant companion for 4 years began to fade, replaced by confidence and capability. She also found herself watching Quentin when he was not looking. She noticed the way his muscles flexed when he split wood, the careful gentleness with which he handled injured animals they occasionally found in the forest. She noticed his laugh, rare but genuine, and the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. She noticed that he always made sure she was warm enough, fed enough, safe enough without ever being overbearing or controlling. Quentin, for his part, found himself increasingly aware of Sarah's presence. He liked the sound of her humming while she cooked, the way she threw herself enthusiastically into learning new skills, her quick intelligence and sharp sense of humor. He liked the way she looked in the morning, sleep-tousled and relaxed, and the way she looked at night, sitting by the fire with her face thoughtful and content. He had not expected to enjoy her company so much. He had lived alone for so long that he had forgotten the simple pleasure of sharing a meal with someone, of having a conversation that ranged beyond practical matters. Sarah challenged him, questioned him, made him laugh. She was not intimidated by his size or his rough appearance. She treated him as an equal, something he had rarely experienced. One evening, about 6 weeks after Sarah's arrival, Quentin returned from checking his trap lines to find her standing on the porch, wrapped in a shawl, staring out at the sunset. The sky was ablaze with color, streaks of orange and pink and purple layered across the horizon. "You're going to freeze out here," he said, climbing the steps. "It's worth it for this view." She glanced at him. "Did you have a good day? Caught 2 nice beavers. Should get good money for the pelts when I take them to trade." He hesitated, then said, "I'll be heading down to the trading post in a few weeks before the snow starts. You could come with me if you wanted. From there, you could catch a stage to wherever you want to go." Sarah's stomach clenched. She had known this moment would come eventually. She could not stay at Quentin's cabin forever. "Where is the trading post?" "About 3 days' ride northeast. Small settlement called Pinecrest. They get traders coming through from all over. You'd have options there." "Options," Sarah repeated softly. She thought about going back to civilization, to towns and people and all the complications that came with them. Then she thought about the past 6 weeks, the happiest she had been since her parents died. "Quentin," she said, "can I ask you something?" "Of course. Why did you really bring me here? You could have just pointed me in the right direction and sent me on my way. Why did you offer to let me stay?" Quentin leaned against the porch railing, his expression thoughtful. "Honest answer. When I saw you in that saloon, helping that wounded man even though your uncle was right there telling you not to, I saw someone with courage. Someone who did what was right even when it was hard. Then when I ran into you on the road, running away with nothing but the clothes on your back and a wooden box, I saw someone who refused to give up. I admired that. I wanted to help if I could. And now, he looked at her, really looked at her, and Sarah felt her breath catch. Now I'm glad you're here. This cabin has felt more like a home in the past 6 weeks than it has in all the years I've lived here." Sarah's heart pounded. "I'm glad I'm here too." They stood in silence, something unspoken building in the air between them. Quentin reached out and gently brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch feather light. "Sarah, I need to tell you something." "What?" "I'm falling in love with you." The words hung in the cooling evening air. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes, but they were not tears of sadness. "I'm falling in love with you too. I think I have been for weeks, but I was afraid to admit it." "Why afraid?" "Because I'm still nothing. I still have no dowry, no family, no prospects. I'm the same girl those men in the saloon mocked. Why would you want someone like me?" Quentin's hands came up to cup her face, his touch gentle despite his size and strength. "Those men were fools. You're not nothing, Sarah. You're brave and smart and kind. You work hard, you learn fast, and you have a strength in you that most people never find. I don't care about dowries or family connections. I care about you. Your name is dowry enough for me." Sarah felt something break open inside her, all the pain and shame and self-doubt flooding out. She threw her arms around Quentin's neck, and he pulled her close, holding her like she was something precious and fragile. "I love you," she whispered against his chest. "I love you too." He pulled back enough to look at her face. "Sarah Thorne, will you marry me?" "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, I'll marry you." Quentin kissed her then, sweet and tender and full of promise. Sarah felt like she was floating, like the mountains themselves were holding their breath. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Quentin rested his forehead against hers. "We'll have to go to Pinecrest for a proper ceremony," he said. "I want to do this right. I want everyone to know you're my wife." "I don't need a fancy wedding," Sarah said. "I just need you. You'll have me forever. But you deserve a wedding, even a small one. You deserve to be celebrated." They went inside, hand in hand, and spent the evening making plans. They would travel to Pinecrest in 2 weeks, get married at the church there, and return to the cabin to spend the winter together. In the spring, Quentin would teach Sarah how to trap and hunt, making her a true partner in his work. They talked about building an addition to the cabin, creating more space. They talked about children, someday, when they were ready. That night, Sarah climbed to her loft with a lightness in her heart she had never felt before. She lay down on the furs and looked out the small window at the stars blazing overhead. Somewhere below, she could hear Quentin moving about, settling in for the night. Soon, very soon, they would share that space. They would build a life together in these mountains, far from the cruelty and judgment of places like Jerome Junction. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of preparation. Sarah mended their clothes and packed supplies for the journey. Quentin went hunting and brought back an elk, which they butchered and preserved. He also disappeared one afternoon and returned with something wrapped in cloth, which he refused to show her. "It's a surprise for the wedding," he said, grinning at her curiosity. The day before they were due to leave for Pinecrest, Quentin took Sarah on a long walk up to a high meadow he wanted to show her. They climbed for over an hour, ascending through pine forest until they broke out above the tree line. The meadow was covered in late blooming wildflowers, and a small alpine lake reflected the blue sky like a mirror. "I've never seen anything so beautiful," Sarah said, turning in a slow circle. "I wanted to bring you here before we left. This is my favorite place in the whole territory. I thought maybe someday we could build a summer cabin up here, a place to come when we need to get away." Sarah walked to the edge of the lake and knelt down, trailing her fingers in the cold water. Quentin came to stand beside her, his reflection joining hers in the still surface. "I keep thinking I'm going to wake up and discover this is all a dream," Sarah said softly. "That I'm still in Jerome Junction, still facing a forced marriage to Edgar Fleming, still trapped with my uncle. Quentin knelt beside her and took her hand. This is real, Sarah. I'm real, and what I feel for you is real. You're free now, you're safe, and you're loved. She turned to him, and the emotion in his eyes took her breath away. This man, this strong, capable, gentle man, loved her. Not for what she could bring him, not for any practical advantage, but simply because he saw her, truly saw her, and loved what he found. They made the journey to Pinecrest 3 days later, riding under clear autumn skies. The small settlement was much like Jerome Junction but less rough around the edges. It had a proper church with a bell tower and a circuit preacher who came through once a month. By great fortune, the preacher was in residence when they arrived. Reverend Matthews was an elderly man with kind eyes and a gentle manner. He listened to their story, or at least the abbreviated version they chose to share, and agreed to marry them the following morning. "You have rings?" he asked. Quentin pulled out the cloth-wrapped package he had been keeping secret. Inside were 2 simple gold bands, slightly worn but still beautiful. "These were my parents' wedding rings. My father gave them to me before he died. I've been carrying them for years, never thinking I'd have reason to use them." Sarah felt tears threaten again. "They're perfect." That night, they stayed in separate rooms at the settlement's small boarding house, maintaining propriety for their last night as unmarried individuals. Sarah barely slept, too excited and nervous and happy to rest. She kept looking at the simple dress she had mended and cleaned, the best she owned. It was not a fancy wedding dress, but it would do. Morning came bright and crisp. Sarah dressed carefully, braiding her long dark hair and pinning it up. She had no flowers, no veil, no fancy accessories. But when she looked at herself in the small mirror, she saw something she had not seen in years, a woman who was genuinely happy. Quentin waited for her outside the church, and the sight of him made her heart skip. He had trimmed his beard and tied back his long hair. He wore clean clothes and polished boots, looking almost civilized, though no amount of grooming could disguise his size or his wild nature. When he saw her, his face lit up with a smile that transformed his usually serious expression. "You're beautiful," he said simply. "So are you." Reverend Matthews performed a simple ceremony with 2 townspeople serving as witnesses. Sarah spoke her vows in a clear, strong voice, promising to love and honor Quentin for the rest of her days. Quentin's voice was rough with emotion when he made his promises to her. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Quentin kissed her with such tenderness that Sarah felt like she might dissolve. After the ceremony, they shared a simple meal at the boarding house, then prepared for the journey back to their cabin. As they mounted their horses, one of the witnesses, an older woman named Mrs. Patterson, approached Sarah. "I heard bits of your story," she said quietly, "about running away from a forced marriage. I want you to know you made the right choice. I was sold to my first husband when I was 17. He was a cruel man who made my life misery for 10 years until he died. I married again later, chose for myself this time, and found happiness. You're lucky to have found a good man." Sarah squeezed her hand. "Thank you for telling me that." The journey back to the cabin felt different now. Everything was the same, the trail and the mountains and the sky, but Sarah felt transformed. She was no longer Sarah Thorne, unwanted orphan and burden. She was Sarah Jameson, beloved wife and equal partner. When they arrived at the cabin, Quentin surprised her by sweeping her up in his arms and carrying her over the threshold. Sarah laughed, clinging to his neck. "What are you doing?" "It's tradition," he said, setting her down gently. "Carrying the bride over the threshold brings good luck." That night, they consummated their marriage in the loft, the space that had been Sarah's alone now shared between them. Quentin was patient and gentle, taking his time to ensure Sarah's comfort and pleasure. Afterward, they lay tangled together beneath the firs, listening to the wind in the pines and the crack of the fire below. "Are you happy?" Quentin asked, his fingers trailing softly along her arm. "Happier than I knew was possible," Sarah answered honestly. She propped herself up on one elbow to look at him. "Thank you for choosing me. Thank you for seeing something in me worth loving. Thank you for taking a chance on a rough mountain man who doesn't know much about civilized living. I don't want civilized living. I want this. I want you. I want these mountains and this cabin and this life we're building together." They spent the winter snug in their cabin, developing the rhythms of married life. Sarah became proficient with the rifle, able to bring down small game to supplement their supplies. Quentin taught her to tan hides and prepare furs for trading. They worked side by side, partners in every sense of the word. The snow came in late November, blanketing the mountains in white. Quentin and Sarah would stand on the porch sometimes, marveling at the transformation of the landscape. The cabin became a warm refuge against the cold, filled with the smell of bread baking and coffee brewing. On Christmas Day, they exchanged simple gifts. Sarah had used scraps of leather to make Quentin a new belt, tooled with a simple pattern she had learned by watching him work. Quentin presented her with a necklace he had made from polished stones he had collected throughout the fall, each one representing a memory from their time together. "This green one is from the day we met," he explained, pointing to an emerald-colored stone. "It reminded me of your eyes. This gold one is from our wedding day. This blue one is from the Alpine Lake." Sarah fastened it around her neck and knew she would treasure it forever. Winter gave way to spring, and the mountains exploded with life. Wildflowers carpeted the meadows, and animals emerged from hibernation. Sarah discovered she was pregnant in early April, and the joy on Quentin's face when she told him made her cry. "We're going to have a baby," he kept saying, as if he could not quite believe it. "A baby. Are you happy about it?" "Happy." He pulled her into his arms, holding her carefully as if she might break. "Sarah, I'm more than happy. I'm blessed. You've given me everything I never knew I wanted." The pregnancy was not easy. Sarah suffered from sickness in the early months, and Quentin fretted over her constantly. But as summer arrived and she began to show, she felt strong and healthy. Quentin became even more protective, if that was possible, insisting she rest more and work less. "I'm pregnant, not dying," Sarah protested when he tried to take over all the chores. "I know, but you're carrying our child. Let me take care of you. You always take care of me. And I always will." In late September, almost exactly a year after Sarah had fled Jerome Junction, she went into labor. Quentin had ridden to Pinecrest a week earlier to fetch Mrs. Patterson, who had experience as a midwife. The older woman stayed calm and confident throughout the long hours of labor, encouraging Sarah and instructing Quentin. The baby arrived just before dawn, a healthy boy with a powerful set of lungs. Quentin held his son with shaking hands, tears streaming down his face. "He's perfect," he whispered. "Sarah, he's absolutely perfect." They named him Thomas after Quentin's father and called him Tommy. The baby thrived in the mountain air, growing strong and healthy. Sarah discovered that motherhood came naturally to her, and Quentin was a devoted father, spending hours just watching his son sleep or playing with him on a blanket by the fire. Life settled into a new pattern, now with 3 instead of 2. Sarah learned to balance caring for Tommy with all her other responsibilities. Quentin expanded the cabin, building a separate room for their son and adding a proper kitchen area for Sarah. 2 years later, they welcomed a daughter whom they named Emma, after Sarah's mother. Tommy was fascinated by his baby sister, always wanting to help care for her. The cabin that had once housed a solitary mountain man now rang with the laughter and noise of a growing family. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Quentin and Sarah took a rare day away from the children, leaving them with Mrs. Patterson, who had become a regular visitor and dear friend. They rode up to the Alpine Meadow, the place where Quentin had brought Sarah before their wedding. "I've been thinking," Quentin said as they stood by the lake, "that we should build that summer cabin I mentioned. The children would love it up here." "That sounds wonderful." Sarah leaned against him, comfortable and content. "Do you ever regret it, giving up your solitary life?" "Not for a single moment. Do you ever regret running away that night? Only that I didn't do it sooner." They sat down on a flat rock, looking out over the mountains spread before them. Sarah thought about the girl she had been, desperate and afraid with no prospects and no hope. She thought about the sneering men in the saloon, mocking her lack of dowry. If she could go back and tell that girl what was waiting for her, she would not have believed it. "What are you thinking about?" Quentin asked. "About how much has changed, about how wrong everyone was about me. About how your love saved me." "You saved yourself," Quentin corrected gently. "You had the courage to run, to take a chance on an unknown future rather than accept a life that would have destroyed you. I just had the good fortune to be there when you needed a friend. You're more than a friend. You're my husband, my partner, the father of my children, and the love of my life. And you're mine." He kissed her softly. "My love, my Sarah. Your name was dowry enough for me then, and it's still the most precious thing I possess now." They returned to the cabin as evening fell, riding through forest dappled with golden light. Smoke rose from the chimney, and they could hear Tommy's laughter before they even dismounted. Inside, Mrs. Patterson had dinner ready, and both children ran to greet their parents with enthusiastic hugs. Later that night, after the children were asleep and Mrs. Patterson had retired to the guest room, Sarah and Quentin sat on their porch watching the stars emerge. The familiar sounds of the mountain night surrounded them: the hoot of an owl, the rustle of wind through pine branches, the distant call of a coyote. "You think we'll ever leave these mountains?" Sarah asked. "Would you want to?" She considered the question. "No, this is home. This is where our life is. I can't imagine being anywhere else." "Good, because I plan to keep you here forever." Forever sounds perfect. The years continued to pass, each one bringing new joys and challenges. Tommy grew into a strong boy who loved the wilderness as much as his father, learning to track and hunt and read the land. Emma proved to have her mother's quick mind and her father's determination, equally at home shooting a rifle or reading from the small collection of books Sarah had gradually acquired. 3 years after Emma's birth, Sarah gave Quentin twin boys, and the cabin expanded again to accommodate the growing family. Money was sometimes tight, but they always had enough. Quentin's furs brought good prices at the trading posts, and Sarah supplemented their income by selling the leather goods she had learned to craft. Sarah kept in touch with Mrs. Patterson, who shared news from the wider world. She learned that her Uncle Mortimer had died in a drunken brawl 2 years after she left. Edgar Fleming had married another young woman who had left him within 6 months, running away in the middle of the night. The story gave Sarah no pleasure, only sadness for a woman who had not been as fortunate in her escape. When Tommy turned 16, he asked his father about going to Prescott to see the city. "You can go," Quentin said, "but remember that you come from the mountains. Don't let city life make you forget who you are." Tommy left in the spring and returned in the fall, full of stories about what he had seen. But he also said with conviction, "I'm glad I went, Pa, but I'm gladder to be home. I don't know how people live like that, all crowded together. I need space to breathe." Quentin and Sarah exchanged a smile, proud that their son had found his own way to appreciate the life they had built. Emma followed a different path. She met a young man at a trading post when she was 18, the son of a merchant family. Sarah saw the way Emma's face lit up around him and recognized the same glow she had felt when falling in love with Quentin. The young man, whose name was David, proved to be kind and respectful. He was fascinated by Emma's wilderness skills and her independence. "He reminds me of you," Sarah told Quentin after meeting David for the first time. "He sees her clearly and loves what he sees." Emma and David married and settled in a small ranch between the mountains and Prescott, close enough to visit regularly but far enough to build their own life. The twins, wild and energetic, showed promise as trappers and hunters, though they were still young. The years turned Sarah's dark hair gray and added lines to Quentin's face, but their love never diminished. If anything, it deepened with time, growing richer and more complex. They knew each other completely, could anticipate needs and thoughts, could communicate with a look or a touch. On their 25th wedding anniversary, their children and grandchildren gathered at the cabin for a celebration. The space was crowded and noisy and full of laughter. Tommy had married a woman from Pinecrest and brought his 3 children. Emma arrived with David and their 2 daughters. The twins, now young men, regaled everyone with stories of their adventures. As Sarah looked around at the family that had grown from that desperate night when she fled Jerome Junction, she felt overwhelmed with gratitude. All of this beautiful, noisy, loving chaos, had come from one moment of courage, from Quentin's willingness to help a stranger, from their decision to choose each other despite what society said they should want. That night, after everyone had settled down to sleep in various corners of the expanded cabin and makeshift tents outside, Quentin and Sarah slipped away to sit on their porch. The stars were brilliant overhead and the air carried the first hint of autumn chill. 25 years, Sarah said softly. Sometimes it feels like yesterday, sometimes it feels like forever. Both, Quentin agreed. It's been both. You remember what those men said in the saloon? About how I had no dowry. I remember you telling me about it. They were wrong about so many things, but they were especially wrong about the most important thing. What's that? Sarah gestured to the cabin full of sleeping family members, to the mountains surrounding them, to the life they had built together. This is my dowry, all of this. This life, this love, this family. It was inside me all along. I just needed someone who could see it. Quentin took her hand, his grip still strong despite the years. Your name was dowry enough for me from the first moment. Everything else has just been a bonus. They sat together in comfortable silence, 2 people who had found each other against all odds and built something lasting. The mountains stood eternal around them, witnessing their love story, holding them safe in the wild heart of the Arizona territory. Inside the cabin, a baby cried softly and was soothed. Someone laughed in their sleep. The fire crackled and popped. These were the sounds of home, of family, of a life well lived. Sarah leaned her head on Quentin's shoulder and closed her eyes, content. She had run away from Jerome Junction with nothing but fear and hope, and she had found everything she never knew she wanted. A home in the wilderness. A partner who saw her true worth. Children and grandchildren who would carry their story forward. The mountain man who had saved her, loved her, and built a life with her still sat beside her, solid and strong as the mountains themselves. His hand held hers with the same gentle strength that had characterized every day of their marriage. I love you, she whispered. I love you too, he answered, as he had answered every day for 25 years. Always. The stars wheeled overhead, marking the passage of time as they always had and always would. But for Quentin and Sarah Jameson, time had been kind. They had taken the raw materials of two broken lives and forged something beautiful. They had proved that love was not about dowries or status or what society deemed appropriate. Love was about seeing someone clearly, accepting them completely, and choosing them daily. And that, Sarah thought as she drifted toward sleep in the arms of her husband, was the only dowry that ever truly mattered. The end.